The new normal. This is a phrase I'm already tired of. It's the temporary abnormal. This is what we're talking about on today's episode of the Driving with Rob podcast. The new normal. This is how things are now, and we just have to accept it. Well, I don't accept it. Because I don't think it is the new normal. I think it's the temporary abnormal. I think the first time I ever heard this phrase, the new normal, was during the recession of 2008, when people were pushing President Obama and saying, "What are you doing about the recession? Why aren't things getting any better? What steps have you taken to improve it? When can we expect all this mess to be over?" Well, being the litigator and politician that he was, his answer was, this is the new normal. A lot of these jobs that have been lost during the recession are never coming back. The lifestyle changes that you've had to make may be permanent. It may never get any better. This may just be the new normal. I didn't believe it then. I don't believe it now. It's the temporary abnormal. See, to say that anything is the new normal means that you've just thrown in the towel and just accepted it. This is the way things are now. I understand why he said it. It was a very slick, very political way of saying, I have no idea how to fix it. Because nobody wants to admit that they don't know what to do. And this was a political way of saying, I really don't know how to fix it. I wish I could fix it. Well, they brought this phrase out again during the COVID-19 dilemma, during the global pandemic. What is going on? How can we stop it? What are you doing to fix it? Well, it's just the new normal. It is not normal for people all over America and all over the rest of the world to have to wear a mask everywhere you go. Well, that's the new normal. Well, no, it's the temporary abnormal. And just by the way, it's not just in America, it's happening all over the world. Recently heard that Italy is going to do a second lockdown. Spain is about to do a second lockdown. The UK is about to do a second lockdown. So it's not just in the United States. And that's why I get so frustrated with politicians, Republicans and Democrats, trying to blame each other for the COVID-19 problem, for the COVID-19 response or lack of response. Yeah, there may not be anything we can do about it, but it's not going to last forever. This is not the new normal. Like I said, to say that it's the new normal means that you have thrown in the towel and given up. This is just how things are now. But I prefer to look at it as that's the way things are for now. Not for always. Not from this day forward, it'll never change. That's the way things are today. And they'll get better. I don't know when, but they will. But I don't want to talk about the COVID-19 pandemic or the COVID-19 lockdown. I want to talk about the new normal. Just that phrase, the new normal. See, back during World War II, there was rationing of everything. There were food rations, scrap metal drives, rubber drives, because everybody in America was working toward winning the war. All your resources had to be pooled together for the war effort. Everybody knew it. We had a common enemy. Everybody has to pull together. But in 1941, 42, 43, people never said this is the new normal. People on the east coast of the United States had to keep their lights off at night and had to keep their shades closed for fear that the Germans would begin bombing the east coast of the United States just like they did the UK. And you kept your lights turned off so they couldn't see you from the air, so they couldn't spot you, so you didn't become a target. Well, it wasn't just your house that was going to get bombed. It was your whole city, your whole neighborhood. So everybody had to turn their lights out and close the shade, pull the shades down, close the blinds. Because long before the United States ever got into World War II, the German Air Force, the Luftwaffe, had a bombing campaign against the UK that people in Britain called the Blitz. It was just night after night, the Germans constantly bombing them. And if it happened there, it could happen here. So everybody in America, especially on the East Coast, had to go lights out so that the Luftwaffe and the bombers couldn't see you in your neighborhood from the air in case it ever started here. But nobody ever said it's the new normal. Well, we're just going to have to get used to for the rest of our lives not having lights at night and keeping our blinds and shades closed and keep our bomb shelter well stocked for the rest of our lives out of fear that we were going to get hit. Nobody back then said this is the new normal. Everybody knew that it was abnormal and also knew that it was temporary, that eventually things would get back to normal. The optimism of the American people would never accept that bad times were the new normal. But during the war, World War II, as bad as things got, nobody ever said this is the new normal. And it lasted for 4 years. The United States was involved in World War II for 4 years. And 4 years can be a long time, but nobody said this is the new normal. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel? Is there any hope that things are going to get better someday? Nobody accepted it. It was the temporary abnormal. During the Great Depression, when things were at their worst, there were soup kitchens, and a quarter of all the working class people were out of jobs. People were homeless for the first time in their lives. Great Depression really lasted about 10 years. And everybody gave FDR credit for ending the Great Depression, when the truth be told, it was actually the war that ended the Great Depression. For all the credit FDR was given for ending the Depression didn't really end until manufacturing plants started building bombs and guns and planes and ships to sell to France and the UK. So production was pretty much in full swing by the time the United States got involved in 1941. So the Great Depression lasted for 10 years. Nobody ever said this is the new normal. Everybody knew that things would get better. As bad as things got, as bleak as things got, and what we're going through now doesn't scratch the surface of the suffering that people went through in the 1930s and really up until the mid-1940s. Life in the United States was pretty bleak and pretty desperate for a long time. But nobody ever said this is the new normal. It was just the temporary abnormal. So as bad as things are, as depressing as things are, as a people, as a country, we've been through worse. And we always came back stronger and better. And after World War II in the 1950s was the greatest boom in economic expansion in the history of the United States. That's when all the baby boomers were born. People weren't afraid of the future. They were making babies. They were so optimistic about the future, they couldn't wait to start a family. After all that we had been through and all that we had come through during the war, during the Great Depression, by the 1940s, late 40s, and early 50s, people said it's time to start making babies again because the future looks bright. What we just came through wasn't the new normal, it was the temporary abnormal. And by 1950, things were not only back to normal, they were better. Same thing happened in the 1970s. We had just come through the anti-baby Vietnam War protests and the civil rights protests and Watergate, then the oil shortage of the late 1970s, which nobody talks about now because there never really was an oil shortage. And as bad as things got by 1978, 79, as bad as they were, nobody said this is the new normal. This is just how it is. We're going to have to start rationing gasoline. You're never going to be as economically successful ever again because it's the new normal. Then Ronald Reagan came along, and the United States had another economic boom. And Ronald Reagan was reelected in one of the biggest, if not the biggest, landslide victories in the history of presidential politics. Because he didn't believe in the new normal either. And Ronald Reagan's campaign slogan in 1984 was, "Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?" And the answer, of course, was a resounding yes. When things got bad, when there was a crisis, when it was really bad, he never said, "This is the new normal. We just have to get used to it. It's never going to get any better." That thought never entered his mind, and never entered the minds of most people back then, because World War II was still fresh enough in people's minds. They knew how resilient the United States was and is. They would never accept a crisis as being the new normal. It's the temporary abnormal. We're not going to be wearing masks for the rest of our lives. Schools aren't going to be closed for the rest of our lives. The airline and hotel industries will come back once people are allowed to travel again. Manufacturing will not only be back to normal. When the government finally allows people to return to work, you're going to be working all the overtime you could stand, because we have all done without for so long, and we've all ran out of not only patience, but ran out of basic commodities, basic things we need to live a normal life. So once the manufacturing comes back, it's going to come back at full throttle. Manufacturing pretty much across the board is going to be up like it has never been up before. And just like with FDR, whoever's president when it comes back is going to get credit for it, whether he had anything to do with it or not. But don't accept it's the new normal from any politician. To say it's the new normal means you don't know what to do, or you're not going to do anything. No, it's not the new normal. It's just the temporary abnormal. And that's going to do it for this episode of the podcast. I appreciate you listening. If you're not a subscriber, click on subscribe, click on follow, whatever the button on your particular podcast player says. Click on that. It doesn't cost you anything. And every time I release a new episode, you'll get a notification just to let you know. Click on the share button to let people know that you listen and you think they should too. Thanks again, and I'll talk to you next time. Bye now.